So Watergate prosecutor Jill Wine-Banks joins us jingleless. Can you believe what we're watching, Jill?
Well, I think that the opening by Graham was one of the most despicable things I've seen, although Barr set a pretty high standard for being despicable.
Right.
But he basically repeated all of Barr's falsehoods. Mm-hmm. He repeated the diversion of, let's look at Hillary. She's really the one we should be investigating, and that was a corrupt investigation. And there was no collusion. Collusion is a word that doesn't exist in law. It's a word that Mueller specifically said we cannot use that word. It's conspiracy and coordination. They're repeating all of the same lies. They're reaching out. In case anybody is watching from the Fox News team, that's what's going to be on Fox News. It's not going to be Dianne Feinstein, who clearly said, excuse me, but here's the evidence of obstruction. It's really masterful manipulation of people and the media, and it's just wrong.
We were talking about Brian Williams broke in apparently during Lindsey Graham and just said he's lying. I mean, it's like, you're right, Joe. We are past time, and the media has got to call this for what it is. I mean, I said earlier he should go the way of Mitchell. Right? I mean, Nixon's AG. I'm not even talking about resign or impeachment. I mean, we just played him on tape twice this morning, Jill, lying to Congress.
He has, well, and of course that just goes with his past lies to Congress,
right,
and his past lies to the American public, which is also something that he should be punished for. I think impeachment would be a quick way to oust him, and needs to start. He really has done a disservice to the institution of the Department of Justice, to his own reputation. He's finished. Who would ever hire him in the future? I mean, he is really, I was stunned by his opening. And he knows what he was facing because he knows from all the commentary.
Right.
He knows from the release of the letter that Mueller wrote saying, you have misrepresented my report, you've missed the context, you've missed the substance. And he just sits there with his calm face and goes ahead and says what he says.
Jill, so I'm reading the letter now. I'm sure you've read it as well. So he still has not released these summaries. So this is the second letter from Mueller, correct?
No, not sure. But
well, he starts it saying, "I previously sent you a letter dated March 25th that includes the introduction and executive summary for each volume." Blah blah blah. I mean, so obviously, Mueller has given him ample warnings in private, right? By letter, by phone.
He absolutely did, and the fact that he put it in writing is something that really shows how little trust he has in Barr, because they've had a long relationship. They knew each other from the past, and if he trusted him, he would have called him and taken notes. But this was, I need to put this in writing. I have to put down that this misrepresents, and that's what we now have. And it's really sad that that's the situation that we're in, where we have this horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a veteran of the Department of Justice, had great respect, and even though I actually served in the Department of Justice under Richard Nixon, and yes, there was more hiring of Republicans once he took over, but I honestly never saw any political decision-making affect the outcome of a recommendation for prosecution.
Yeah.
And I never saw any misrepresentation. And that's something that we need to really focus on, is that we now have the stonewalling, which is really the most serious thing that I think is going on, the total decision of the president to not cooperate in any way, shape, or form with any of the ongoing investigations, and refusing subpoenas that are clearly required by the law. His tax returns, the rule says he shall turn it over. It doesn't say he can, may. It says that the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service shall. It's not optional.
I know, I hear you. And Jill, so we still haven't seen these summaries that Barr is talking about in the letter. I mean, he clearly is hiding the, the full unredacted report, right?
Exactly, he is, and he also made clear, by the way, in his testimony this morning, he said, we had very few redactions in the obstruction part, but even the report that is in the secret room for representatives and senators to see is redacted as to grand jury testimony. And it is very clear under the grand jury rules of secrecy that there's an exception for Congress to get the full unredacted part of grand jury testimony. That's preliminary to a judicial proceeding, which impeachment is, allows an exception for turning over. And all that has to happen would have been for a simple request from Congress and from the Attorney General to turn over that grand jury testimony, and Congress would have a fully unredacted copy. They would have, indeed, not just the summary in the Mueller report, they would have access to the grand jury testimony itself in full.
How do we get that without the Attorney General's cooperation, which we're clearly not going to get?
That's the problem. There is a second exception to the grand jury rule of secrecy that says that in the case of foreign hostile acts, any attorney can make that available. However, of course, any attorney who has it is under the jurisdiction of the Attorney General, so he probably still has the power to prevent that. I think that it is possible that Mueller and the grand jury foreman could go to the Chief Judge of the District of Columbia and say, under 6E, we would like to release this to Congress as in part of their judicial proceeding, and that you wouldn't really need the Attorney General. The question is whether Robert Mueller feels that he is bound by the restrictions that have been placed on him. The same restrictions, by the way, that prevented him from saying, I would indict, because there's enough evidence, and that is now being mischaracterized as, I left it up to Bob Barr to make the decision, or William Barr to make the decision. And there's no way that he left it up to Barr. That was not his intention at all.
Yeah, it's clear. And
at it. And then subsequent to Trump being in office, he left it to a future prosecutor. Here's the evidence that I'm preserving for you when he's not a sitting president.
Well, and Eric Holder, by the way, as you probably know, agrees with you, Jill, that this is a flawed rule in the first place, that you can't indict a sitting president.
I have said from the very beginning, actually, I've said since the time of Watergate, that I thought a sitting president was not above the law, that a sitting president could be indicted and tried and convicted if he had sufficient evidence against him. And certainly in Watergate, that was true. I believe, now that I've read the report, that there is enough evidence of a clear case of obstruction.
Yep.
And I think that we need to start saying the truth, which is that the Mueller report is the smoking gun.
Does this not change the nexus on impeachment or on whatever you call these hearings?
Yes. I mean, I'm being careful saying I would love to have fact-finding hearings. I want to see Don McGahn appear before the public and let him, in the same way that John Dean did, be subjected to scrutiny. Let the American people decide if he's telling the truth, because if he is, there's a clear case of obstruction.
Yep.
Corey Lewandowski should be called. Let's see how credible he is. And if reading the summary of what happened with the two of them, I know there's an obstruction, but it's not the same thing as hearing them say it.
That's right.
To the American people. And we don't have to call it impeachment hearings, because we will make a decision on whether or not to proceed with impeachment inquiry once we see the full evidence, once you can really evaluate it. And I don't think we should be sitting around waiting for Mueller. Now everybody's saying, we have to have Mueller testify. Well, we do need him to testify about whether he was shut down prematurely.
Thank you.
We need to see his testimony about this letter and what happened and how misrepresented this was, why he wasn't at the press conference that was a clear spin session before the release of it. it seems like they want to make sure they got their first opinion out and their first impression was created. I want to hear that from him, but
I mean, to obstruct,
I want to hear substantive witnesses.
Yeah, to obstruct the obstruction. I mean, it really is sort of a head spinning. Let me just come right out and say I cheated on you with Cynthia Oxney earlier, so I need. I'm just gonna. I think our relationship is strong enough to withstand it.
Okay, I can take it.
Okay. No, but I wanted to get your take because she said something interesting. I just wonder if you might agree or not. But she has a hunch that what's under, because obviously now even more than ever, you are like, what are under all these redactions and what is in these summaries that they won't let us see? She thinks that Trump Sr. perhaps and Jr. may have taken the fifth. Do you think?
It's possible, but I think that would have gotten out. I don't know. But my point is, it doesn't really matter,
right?
Because even with the redactions, I'm saying that the Mueller report, as it stands right now, is a smoking gun.
Yep.
We don't need any more. We have it.
Yep.
It's there. Now, I want to see them live. I want to make sure that the report accurately portrays everything that witnesses said. So I still want to have the chance for Republicans, for the Paula Duncans of the world, the juror who said, I'm a loyal Trump supporter, but the evidence in the Manafort case was so compelling that I voted to convict him on all 18 counts.
Jill,
and I believe that could happen to a lot of Trump voters and Trump representatives and senators.
Agreed. I listened. Look at Elizabeth Warren has rocketed up to second.
Go Elizabeth.
Because of, I think, her clear, moral voice on impeachment. Do you agree with Lawrence Tribe that that it basically has already begun, the impeachment process, whatever we call it, that what we're watching right now, these hearings, that's how Watergate started? Is that true?
Yes. I mean, Watergate started with basically fact-finding hearings to look at what had gone wrong and what legislation might be needed to prevent future similar actions happening. And it educated the public. People saw John Dean. They heard Alexander Butterfield. And they realized that there was compelling evidence on the side of the president actually being a crook, despite the denial that he was.
McGahn could be his John Dean, huh?
McGahn could be the John Dean, and even Lewandowski. I mean, anyone who's willing to tell the truth about all these episodes that are reported in the report about things that look like obstruction.
Yeah.
And, the fact that they had not enough on the collusion side is partly because the obstruction was successful.
Thank you. Thank you. Jill, real quick, I'm so sorry. I always go so long with you. And I know you want to get, Leahy is ripping him a new one, which is fantastic. So we want to get back to this. But real quick, you read Hillary Clinton's op-ed, correct?
Yes.
And just curious, your take, obviously, very unique perspective, having been, like you, on the Watergate case. I thought it was brilliant, but the only thing I saw different there, she talked about the Senate. Had the Senate Select Committee in Watergate, but isn't that the key difference, that we have a Senate? If you just watch the disgrace of, as you said, Lindsey Graham, and all, I mean, we don't have a Senate that is going to do the right thing here. Nope. Isn't that the key difference between?
Well, it certainly is a key difference, but remember, even in the House, I mean, there was a divided view, and Rodino, at the time of impeachment hearings, worked really hard to bring about bipartisan support. He was brilliant, and we need to do the same thing, which is why I'm saying let's see the witnesses. And of course, the Senate won't even let us see the witnesses.
Right.
They're putting out the false narrative over and over and over again. And so I really hope for a return to some bipartisanship.
Right, but for now, the House is going to have to do it, right, is the point, because that's the only place we have the power and, frankly, the decency, to
do what's right.
And it was the Republicans, as you well know, it was the Republicans who turned on Nixon.
Yep.
A man who had total control. He had a landslide victory, 49 out of 50 states, the popular vote, and his approval rating went from very high in the 60s to 17% when the facts started coming out.
Come on, we can do better than that this time, everybody. Let's go.
Get down to 16. Let's get down to 16.
Jill, thanks so much. I know you want to get back to the hearings as well.
Yes, I do.
All right. Talk to you soon, Jill.
Everybody should be listening.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, there she goes.